So as we embark on a new as we move on to the next section, which is bringing us close to the end of the general section to see where we're at, we have been learning about prayer, about davening, specifically morning prayers. After we spoke about how one starts the day, we've been going through the davening and the different sections of the davening. And we are now all the way up to section 25. Tomorrow will be section 26. Not tomorrow, the next section will be 26, which will be about Kaddish, which will bring the morning davening to a conclusion. So we're now discussing the concluding prayers. So we worked our way through the whole davening, and now we're at that final last section of the davening. So once we've davened Shemona Esrei, then we do Tachnun, which we spoke about in section 22, when we ask Hashem to forgive us for things that we may have done wrong, and we speak about different ways that we may have sinned. And then we read from the Torah. And once we've done reading from the Torah, we move on to the concluding prayers. And the first of those concluding prayers is Ashrei. So Ashrei and Tehillah LeDavid, which is actually one prayer. It's just that we have one verse. And then we move on to Tehillah LeDavid, which is from the next chapter. But either way, that final prayer, Ashrei, is when one says it, one should concentrate well, and especially when saying the verse Pesayach es yadecha, open up your hand, or maspia lachol chayratzain, you open up your hand and you sustain the lives of every person, of every will. And one should especially concentrate during saying that, while saying that clause, having in mind that we're praising Hashem for looking after the needs of every individual, and that He should look after our own needs as well. In fact, the Gemara says that anybody who says Ashrei 3 times a day will merit to go to Olam Haba, the world to come. So that would be once in the beginning of the davening after Baruch She'amar, once in the end of the davening, and then once by Mincha. And the Gemara actually asks, what's so special about Ashrei? Is it that it goes through all of the Aleph Beis? Because if you look at the Ashrei, you'll see every verse starts with the next letter of the Aleph Beis. The Gemara says, but we have another chapter that goes through the Aleph Beis. Chapter 119 of Psalms, of Tehillim, goes through the Aleph Beis, giving 8 verses that start with each of the letters. The Gemara says, no, it's because we're speaking about how Hashem gives the needs, everybody's needs. Hashem gives everybody their needs. The Gemara says, but there's another verse for that as well. The Gemara says it's the two together. The fact that we're speaking about how Hashem looks after the needs of every individual, and we say it as it builds up, going through all the Aleph Beis, those two things together give it tremendous power, and therefore one should concentrate when saying Ashrei. In fact, we mentioned earlier that if you didn't concentrate when saying that verse, Pesayach es yadecha, towards the end of the Ashrei, that you open up your hands, then you should say the verse over again. You don't need to say the whole Ashrei again, but you should actually repeat that verse again. Although generally nowadays we say that if you didn't concentrate, don't do it again, because chances are you won't concentrate the second time either. But we're just talking about one verse, so the Shulchan Aruch does encourage one to repeat it again. So it's a time to concentrate, although it looks like you're kind of wrapping up the davening, to stay focused. Once we've said the Ashrei prayer, we move on to the Lama Natseach prayer. Lama Natseach Vizra David. So it's a psalm by David. Ya'ancha Hashem b'yom tzara. Hashem should answer you on a day of affliction. So we're asking Hashem to help us in all our tzaras. And since this is a prayer that is less of a joyful prayer, because we're talking about Hashem helping us in a time of tzaras, so we skip this out on special days. So on Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, or 14th and 15th of the first Adar, after the 2 Adars, all of these different joyous days, the day before Pesach, the day before Yom Kippur, on Tisha B'Av, or in a house of a mourner where there already is so much sadness, we would skip out this prayer, Lama Natseach. And we would also skip out another prayer, Kel Erech HaPayim, which is said just before Torah reading. if you're familiar with that little paragraph just before the reading of the Torah. So we've said Ashrei, and then if it is not a joyful day, then we say La B'Ratzeach. Again, a powerful prayer from Tehillim by King David, where we ask Hashem to help us in our time of tzaras. And we say that. Number 3. We say the Kedusha that is included in Uva L'Tzion with the Targum Aramaic translation. So when the Chazan repeats the Amidah, so we have that special Kedusha. When everybody says, Nekadesh es Shimcha Ba'ila B'Kedusha, when it's Kakasuv Ayad V'Yach, Avakarazel Zeviyah, Bar Kadesh, Kadesh, Kadesh. So we say that in the repetition of the Amidah, together with the Chazan, and it's a very holy prayer, but we say it again in this concluding paragraph of the davening, and this time after each clause that we say, we translate it into Aramaic. So it's quite interesting. So you're saying it first in Hebrew and then in Aramaic. I wonder how that plays out in the translation, because if the Aramaic is a translation of the Hebrew and you're having an English translation, it'll be interesting how it translates, where the differences would be, but I'm sure there is, because any translation puts emphasis in specific words. And again, one should concentrate when reciting this, when saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. As far as the Targum, the Aramaic translation, that should be said quietly. That doesn't need to be said aloud. Now, this Kedusha doesn't have to be said with a minyan. Why? Because the first Kedusha is when we ourselves are offering holiness to Hashem, Kadosh, and we need the power of a minyan to do that. But this Kedusha, we're speaking about the way the angels praise Hashem, and therefore, since we're speaking about how they praise Hashem, therefore that could be done without a minyan as well. So it doesn't have to be done together with a minyan. I'm referring to the Kedusha in the middle of the Uva L'Tzion prayer, a prayer that comes just before the end of the davening, if I'm remembering correctly. Quickly checking my notes over here. Okay. Finally, on to Aleinu. So he says, actually, you shouldn't walk out of shul before this Kedusha, again, in Uva L'Tzion. So stay with that for that Kedusha, and right after that comes Kaddish. It's the Chazan's Kaddish. And then after the Chazan's Kaddish, we have Aleinu. But a little bit more about that Kedusha. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun. So you should glorify this Kedusha by saying it together with the minyan, and therefore, if you arrive at the shul where the congregation is saying it, you could say it with them even before you say your own prayers, meaning you could join in. You may recite this Kedusha even before saying the 2 verses preceding it, that is Uva L'Tzion and Vanisa Isprisi. And after you conclude the Kedusha, you say these 2 verses, and certainly, in other words, if you come into shul as they sang that Kedusha, so you're pretty late because they're almost finished davening, then you would say it with them and afterwards go back and say the verses that you missed out, so that you could say it together with the congregation. Okay, then we come to Aleinu. So we say, Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. It is upon us to praise the Master of the worlds. And this should be said with great reverence. Joshua instituted this prayer when he conquered Jericho. So there's a famous story where they walked around the walls of Jericho 7 times, and then the walls collapsed. And what were they saying? They were saying the prayer of Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. Let us offer praise to the Master of everything. Okay, then we say the psalm for the day. So the psalm for the day goes back from in the times of the temple. The Levium would every day of the week sing a particular section from Tehillim that corresponded with that particular day. And similarly, we do that as well at the end of davening. Each day there's a special psalm that is connected with that day of the week. So if you've had a really poor time concentrating on davening, you're going to have to at least now stop and remember what day of the week it is, so that you know which psalm to say. Your autopilot is not going to work at this point. I think perhaps it would have been better if this was instituted at the beginning of the davening so that we could remind ourselves to concentrate. But obviously everything is by divine reason. It was just a joke, a sad joke. Okay. And then, as well as other psalms, every community according to its custom, meaning it's an old custom to say different sections of Tehillim at the end of davening. Great Park has the Tehillim that they recite at the end of davening. The Chabad custom is to say every day a few chapters as they are divided by the month. Not just the Chabad custom, it goes back actually all the way to the Shalah, where over the course of a month one concludes the Tehillim. So at the end of davening, it's a time to say additional Tehillim. And upon leaving the shul, one can recite the verse, Hashem nachedi, Hashem lead me. I haven't seen this being practiced. It's from the 5th verse of Tehillim. You should bow towards the Aron Kodesh like a pupil taking leave from his master when we leave shul. And when leaving shul, one should not leave with one's back to the Aron Kodesh, but rather to the Ark, but rather one should walk out sideways and do the same when going down from the bimah. Meaning one should walk down in a way that one shows reverence to the shul, to the ark, and to the bimah. When leaving the shul, it is forbidden to run or walk with long strides, meaning we shouldn't run out of shul because this would make it appear as if our stay in shul was like a burden. This only applies if you're leaving to work. But if you're leaving shul in order to go learn, to a base medrash, to a Torah center, then it would be totally appropriate. It would be okay for you to run because you're just going from one mitzvah to the next. You're not showing that you don't like or you try to get away from Hashem, but rather you're moving on from one mitzvah to the next. And that brings us to the end of a huge section that we've been doing after the last couple of weeks. We've worked our way through pretty much the whole davening, all the laws involved. We haven't studied the meaning of all the prayers. That would be another class. That would be a class on prayers. But we've at least familiarized ourselves with whatever we need to know, basic information as far as how we approach the davening from beginning to end. So we'll end a few minutes early. And please God, tomorrow we'll learn the laws of the mourner's Kaddish.
Yosef, I've got a question.
Yes.